welcome everyone. I just have to say thank you all for being here. I know there's a lot of traffic today. Maybe I should be on my camera. So also welcome to all the people who are joining us online. And this is the last session. Okay, so we're ending Dementia Basics. I know you're gonna miss it because hopefully you'll learn something, but also it's a great time for sharing ideas and learning more about dementia. And also, in a way, it's important to know all the resources that you can find in our community too, right? So I think it's been a great pleasure to be your host as well. This is a big effort for us as an organization, and also volunteers are involved, our staff, everybody is very happy and also very eager to give you the opportunity to learn more and have more awareness about dementia in many forms. As you see that it's quite complex a topic. There's so many aspects of dementia that we should learn to help our loved one, right? So we have a very special guest for today. But before we start, I just have to say that Dementia Basics Handout 2, it's also the management of behavior and psychological symptoms is from pages 18 to 33. And today we have a very special guest, and I won't take longer here, but Dr. Della Malva. She's a neuropsychologist from the Ottawa Hospital Civic Campus. She's been a great speaker for many years, and I have to acknowledge that she's been amazing, and you will learn a lot today. And without further ado, I will turn over to Lori. Welcome, Lori, and this is your little rodent.
Thank you. Can I just put that here?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
And
Because
also, this is
because I'll be pushing this button and I'll be talking into the remote instead if I don't get this done. Okay. All right. So hopefully that will work.
in advance here.
Let me just test this out. Okay, good. All right. Well, welcome. In terms of the camera, I'm standing in the right spot. Okay, I'm gonna just conscious of blocking your view, but so thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here this evening. This is a session that I typically participate in. My colleague, Dr. Lisa Sweet, is the other neuropsychologist that delivers a session before this one. So I guess you've had a little bit of the background about some of the reasons why we can see difficult behaviors when we begin to have cognitive decline. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the practicalities of that. So the most important thing, I think, there are a couple of principles that are kind of overarching. They'll be sort of the overarching principles of most of what we talk about today. We're here basically to figure out or to be able to share together tips and ways to manage some of these behaviors that become quite difficult sometimes for caregivers, but also very frustrating for the person with dementia, living with dementia. So what are the kinds of things that we can think about proactively? What are the kinds of strategies that we can use to manage these behaviors so that quality of life for the caregiver as well as the person with dementia is as good as it can be? So, and also I think there's some resources in the package that will come your way. So I think the most important thing, I think the session that you've had already has oriented you a little bit. And I think what you hopefully have come away with is the fact that sometimes that all behavior comes from drives, motivations, our needs and our values as human beings. And basically, when these behaviors become difficult in someone who has cognitive decline, it is because the brain is changing, right? So there is an underlying reason why, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. So we're going to address some of these symptoms and behaviors that come with the changing brain and the way in which the person is trying to have their needs met. and also talk about, work from a solution-based problem-solving point of view. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then there'll be some vignettes and things that we can talk about as well. And, I always say that I'm basically talking to a room full of experts because we all have shared experience with some of these issues. So please don't hesitate to share with the rest of the group, because you've probably learned a lot along the way in your journey. All right. So I've said before that every human being comes with a story. They have a biography, they have lived life, they have values, they have a framework in which they see life, but also behavior is really driven always by drives and motivations. And so when a person is experiencing symptoms of cognitive decline or dementia, then what's happening is no different. They are also acting in ways that they're trying to satisfy what their needs are as well. Just like everyone else, we have a need for affection. We have a need for connection. We are all social. We are a social animal. We want to be safe and secure. We want to have our basic needs met. And so this is what is underlying everything that we do. It is important to keep that in mind, because when, of course, we are in situations that are frustrating, and there are situations that become quite frustrating, we can lose sight of the fact that what we're there to do is to mediate the world for that person. So basically try to get through a situation and figure out the best way to address it. I always am reminded when I come to this sentence that, a principle of being a parent. I remember a long time ago when my children were little, and one of the best pieces of advice that I got was, well, if it's not going to hurt anybody, then you don't have to address it. You kind of pick your battles and you choose. So it's very important to remember that it's the same thing. Is the behavior or is the situation one that is going to create lack of safety or problems with, security, or is it about somebody's well-being? But if it's not, and it's not going to hurt anyone, then sometimes there are things that we can just let go. So we don't have to address every single issue. So in your handouts, you'll see an anecdote that a person with dementia wrote was that having dementia was like being abroad, where, you're traveling in a different country. You can't understand the signs. You can't make yourself understood. And you are trying to, navigate or find your way around or do the things you have to do. And I guess the feeling that they had was that same type of feeling. Oh, I just don't want to, okay. So you'll have your slides. Sorry about that. My head is going to be in your way, I think, from time to time, but you'll be able to manage. So I think an important thing to realize is that, you kind of put yourself in a place where you're sort of a host in another country, and the person with dementia is the tourist. And so what are the kinds of things that you would do? How would you respond if someone, if you knew that someone was not able to communicate or possibly understand what you are saying? Then how is it that you would help them and figure out what it is that they need? So we're kind of in that same situation. Here we go. Why are we going through, what is the reason that we want to be proactive and solution-based and find behavioral ways to manage symptoms of dementia? Basically because, for the most part, many of these symptoms can be managed pharmacologically. They can be managed by medication. But as the brain becomes more vulnerable and more frail, the effects of those medications also becomes heightened. And so to the extent that we can avoid medication and work behaviorally to control whether it's psychological symptoms, whether it's anxiety or apathy or depression, or whether it's agitation and so forth. If we can find ways to manage those without relying on medication, it is always better for the person. So, depending on, and as well, you're looking at different causes, and I'm just wondering, I just won't be able to find a spot. I won't be able to. So you're looking at, different causes of the behaviors, because we'll see that sometimes what's motivating agitation may be pain or discomfort or fatigue because sleep has been disrupted. So it might be basic unmet needs. And, then are there ways in which we can find an approach that is going to address some of those issues without resorting to medication? Now, the other principle here to remember, so one is this idea that behavior is driven by unmet needs. The other important thing that is at sort of a takeaway point is that the approach that we're trying to take is one that is, as I said before, solution-based. So you're looking for a solution, you're trying to work out a problem. And that means staying here, right? So if you think about a situation where, you're on the road and you're the driver and someone is driving erratically in front of you, there are a couple of different ways to react. Perhaps you experienced both of those this evening on your way here. So one is that someone is driving erratically and you're like, oh my gosh, what is that crazy driver doing in that car? I can't believe that they're, so that's very emotional. Okay, so this is emotion focused. So and you're kind of attributing a judgment. It's a judgment, and it's a negative judgment on someone else, versus saying, oh, that car is swerving. I hope the person is all right in that car. And you know what? I'm going to avoid it by doing this, or navigating the road in this way. This is a solution-based approach. So the attribution that you make to behavior is your frame of reference. It keeps you either in your head or you kind of get into the emotional realm. And when we get into the emotional realm, it sort of shuts down some of the problem solving, some of the rational ways in which we can resolve issues. So trying to avoid that flooding, the emotional flooding, and really trying to stay very much focused on what is the problem and how am I going to work this through. That's what the attribution model is all about. Okay, so that's something that is also part of the framework that we're trying to address today. So the sense-making process, I think I've already mentioned it. So sort of what are the behaviors that what is it that you might have expected the person to do, or that you need that individual to do? You need to get to an appointment, they need to cooperate. You need to get in the car at a certain time. You need to be able to navigate, the places that you go to. So you need someone who's amenable to all of these things. That's the behavior that you anticipated. But perhaps things go awry and all of a sudden things are not what you expected. It doesn't go that way. Well, the way that you work this through is, well, that's what I expected. This is what happened. Why did that happen? What happened just before? Was there a trigger? Was there something that happened that created the situation? How can I avoid it another time? What can I do the next time? So it may not be about this moment. This moment may be a learning opportunity, but it is a way to analyze the situation and try to make sense of it so that you can put something proactively in place for the next time. And of course, once you try that approach, it may or may not work. And we'll see some scenarios where, a person will try a particular solution thinking that that's the trigger, but it may not necessarily be. So then you have to go back to the drawing board and try again. But that is the solution, sort of that problem solving approach that we're talking about. Now, there are lots of different things that create a situation. There are many different contributors. So for the first, one thing that we know is that you have factors that have to do with the person themselves. So what are the kinds of things that are going on in the individual? Maybe it's a certain, I said before that we all come with our personalities, our stories, our likes and dislikes, our value system. So perhaps it's something in the individual. Maybe it's a personality characteristic. It's something that they've always been afraid of, or something that they've always liked to do. So there is all of that pre-existing history. In addition to that, there may be whatever is happening in the person. They're uncomfortable, they're in pain, they haven't slept properly, they're thirsty, they're hungry. What is going on? They're bored. All of those are things inside a person. Then, of course, every situation is sort of called, it's an integrated experience. An integrated experience means that there's one person on one side and another person on the other. So there are also driving factors that might have to do with us, the other person on the other side of the situation. So sometimes we haven't slept. Sometimes we are hungry. Sometimes we are pressed for time. Sometimes we are anxious and agitated. So we have those needs as well. Or there may be things that we know have to get done, or this is one in many, many different items on our list of to-dos for the day. So there might be a whole bunch of things that have to do with how we are feeling as well, and the way that we interact with the person with dementia. And then, of course, there's the environment around us. You know, we may be in a busy shopping center, or it may be that we have, you know, the person hasn't seen anyone for 3 days or for the last week. They haven't had anything to do. There's boredom. Or there's too much clutter, or there are too many shadows in the room. It's not organized properly. There may be obstacles that they see and they can't make sense of. So it might be the environment as well. So when we are looking at solving the problem and looking at what the triggers of behavior may be, we always have to remember, is it something to do with the person? Is it something to do with us? Or could it be something in the environment? So those are 3 factors. And of course, we have, you know, the brain that is changing, and it's not, it basically is not processing in the same way. It's not processing information in the same way, and it's not creating responses in the same way. So you have the perfect storm, and that's what a behavioral or psychological symptom of dementia is. It basically is that interaction between having, as the disease progresses, there is less ability to communicate. So there are word finding problems, there are problems, conceptual difficulties, there might be memory problems. So you have that. But then you also have more dependence. And so an individual also may come with a greater need to be able to communicate because they have more to share, because they are more dependent, but they're not able to communicate that in the right way. So together, those things create this situation where the unmet needs actually really increase. And so that's kind of that underlying situation that we were talking about. So basically, if we have a situation where someone is behaving in a way that it's unpredictable and or we find difficult, it may be that they have something that they're trying to communicate and they are trying to fill that need, or it's because the interaction and the situation has created more anxiety, and it sort of escalated all of the issues. And so this is what we are trying to avoid. So what are some of the things that are very typical when we have cognitive impairment? Where can those unmet needs primarily come from? Well, first of all, one of the things that we know is that when there is cognitive change, what happens is that people tend to become more isolated. So either because they are avoiding other individuals, or because the people around them, the kind of support system that was around them, little by little, you know, people become uncomfortable. They don't know how to interact, or it's not quite the same person. They themselves are uncomfortable with the situation. And so because of that, there's a lot more, there's a larger tendency to become more isolated. So it may be that there's a need for interaction and there's a sense of loneliness. We tend to do less. Our lives become much more simplified. You know, the more cognitive impairment there is, the less you take on. You leave tasks and hobbies and interests that you enjoyed doing. So now there is more time to fill and less things to fill it with that you feel comfortable with. So you may have left some of those things behind, and now there's boredom. We all come to this world with a need to have a sense of purpose. And in fact, the happiest retirees even are those individuals who are not just hedonistically doing things to, make sort of their lives pleasant, but it's those individuals that continue to find meaning in what they do. So, and that's just an anecdote to consider for retirement. But it is important to realize that we are all in need of meaningful activity. So whether we have a cognitive impairment or whether we're cognitively fit, it is important to feel that we are contributing in some way, so that we are here and our presence matters. It may be about discomfort, as I talked about before, whether it's fatigue, being uncomfortable in our clothes, being hungry and thirsty and so forth. It may be because there's too much stimulation and our brain is not able to process all of that. And of course, we all have, as a human being, you have the sense of autonomy, and we value that. And it's very important to feel independent. And of course, as we progress with this illness, what happens is that we lose more and more of that control. So there are people around us that are taking on more of the responsibilities. And so that need for control still exists, though. And so we have to find some way to channel it. And of course, pain. So these are all, when we're thinking about, well, what could that unmet need be? These are some of the most salient, the more common reasons. I need to go back a little bit. I'm sorry, right. So as caregivers, I think we're in a great position to be able to be agents for the person with dementia, because the likelihood is that they are people that we know very well. So our knowledge of that individual, their likes and their dislikes, plays a big role in how we find ways to manage the behavior. Knowing that someone has never really liked to bathe, but prefers to shower, or vice versa, makes a big difference, when you're proposing, hygiene. Knowing that an individual tends to be introverted and prefers to have time alone can give you a bit of a guide in terms of, well, what are the kinds of activities, all of a sudden you're going to put them in groups or, in rooms full of people. They've never been that kind of person. They don't enjoy that. Or suddenly, it's like classical music is really good for your brain, but they've always liked country music. Well, it's not going to speak to them, right? So I think it's just important to know that people come with their preferences. They have, like I said, they have their story. And if we know their story, then that helps us as well. It gives us a window into how it is that we can help them. And sometimes we also know that, someone becomes quite anxious when they're in pain, or if they're sick, or they become very stoic. So we also know their responses in times of stress, or the kinds of behaviors that they exhibit if they're really hungry, or when they're hot, or, their tolerance for certain things. So again, these are just little clues that we can use to try to decipher what's actually going on. So I think it's important to remember that we're just like that, the tourist anecdote before. We're basically looking not just at words, and it's not about words anymore, but it's really behavior and trying to decipher, what is this person trying to tell me? What can I read into the behavior? Now, so just to illustrate that, for example, let's think about pain, because pain can be a very significant driving factor to behavior, and particularly agitation, frustration, and blowouts and so forth, right? So look at the facial expression. We're kind of familiar with the kinds of ways in which people manifest pain. So is it that, or is it the vocalization, or they're moaning, or they're groaning, or that kind of thing, or using our bodies in ways that are not fluid? So looking for signs, and not just, a person can't say, I have a pain here, in this part of my body and so forth. But some of the behavior you might be able to decipher from that, that they're feeling pain, for example. And since we're talking about discomfort, obviously, one of the things, when I give feedback, I do cognitive assessments within the hospital. So it might be at the geriatric day hospital, for example, or I see inpatients throughout the hospital as well. So one of the things that I always include in almost every single feedback that I give as a compensatory strategy for someone who has a cognitive impairment, because it helps everyone. And in fact, it helps people that don't have, a cognitive impairment as well, is the idea that you keep to a routine. Routine and order and predictability. You kind of can go, your brain goes on autopilot. You don't have to be sort of problem solving and anticipating and planning if things are routine and expected. So creating this habit, through the day is really important. And it's a great way to make sure that we don't fall into those situations where someone has skipped a meal or hasn't taken medication or hasn't used the bathroom. So these are all things in ways in which we can kind of make sure that we avoid those acute discomforts. In addition to helping with things like anxiety and so forth. And we'll see that in a moment as well, because anxiety is really very much fear of the unknown. That's what anxiety is. It's when we don't know what's going to happen next that we become anxious. So when we have predictability, when we have structure, it's going to really ease that feeling of feeling overwhelmed. So it goes for something like pain or something like thirst, but it also goes for something much more general. And I think you have in your handouts as well different signs. So these are the ways in which, these are just illustrations about how can we read some of the signs of what some of those unmet needs are. So dehydration is huge because, we can feel hungry, or we can feel weak. We think we're hungry, but actually we're thirsty. Or we can feel very weak and apathetic and lethargic. And those can also be because of dehydration. So of course, these are just some illustrations about the kinds of things that you're looking for, physical signs. And again, it goes to that whole idea that what we're doing is we are detectives. We're trying to figure things out. Now, so this is a topic that's sort of very dear to my heart, and especially since we've come out of the COVID pandemic. So the COVID pandemic, social isolation in the elderly and in people with dementia was a pandemic long before the COVID pandemic. So it was a social pandemic already. And Canada is not really at the forefront of planning for that. Places like, for example, in the United Kingdom or in Australia, so they actually, the UK actually has appointed a minister for loneliness, right? Because they recognize that isolation and loneliness are huge factors they're modifiable risk factors for poor health outcomes. So when you are isolated or lonely, you have a higher risk of cardiac illness, of other metabolic illnesses, the death rates increase, and there are many different reasons why, but it's extremely important. And modifiable risk factor, we call something modifiable when we can do something about it. So basically, it's a question of trying to address, and I think with the pandemic, what's happened is that we all sort of regressed into a cocoon in a sense. And it was and we also lost the habits and the social structure around us to kind of keep us connected. And even something as simple as being able to go to a shop in person, because there is, even if it's superficial, it's interaction, social interaction, when you're saying hello and, good morning, and to someone who's, serving you coffee or whatever. So we really, in trying to keep people physically healthy, I think it was a huge, huge step backward for our health in general. And there hasn't been, with the world reopening. I think for a lot of people, the habits that we created, I don't know about you, but I had to force myself to get back into a different kind of life, because it's very comfortable to sit at home, you know, in your pajamas and in front of the computer and work all day, versus just trying to get up there and out. It's more trouble. So I think that we are doing it slowly, but public health is certainly not helping. You know, public health policies to get people back out there, because it's almost as if we needed healing from staying healthy from the pandemic. So I think it's really important to realize that social isolation is one of the pillars of brain health as well. Socialization, social engagement is one of the pillars of brain health. And with isolation comes poor health, but also poorer brain health. So that's sort of like that's my pulpit. I've, kind of made my point. But when we have then on top of it someone with a cognitive impairment, as I said before, little by little you abandon the card playing or the book club or some of the other contacts that you had, and suddenly your friends may not necessarily come to visit as often and so forth. And so it becomes a lot more difficult to have this in our lives. And as caregivers, it's also a struggle, because on the one hand, you have someone who needs that socialization, but they also are maybe more apathetic, less motivated, slower to do things, more reluctant to go out and socialize. So it's a matter of finding a balance. How do you stimulate someone socially? Do you have someone, do you have people come over or choose activities that the individual can participate in and can enjoy? So it's a huge, it's a huge question, but it's something I think that we just really need to be conscious of. So looking for social groups that are adjusted to the needs of the person with dementia is really important. The right pace, and as I said before, something that's interesting. So you're not necessarily going to take someone who's never ever had an interest in a particular issue or a particular sport or a particular hobby, and now you're like, well, this is going to be good for you. That's just not going to work. It's not going to work. So participating in group activities, and I think also anything that you can do, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, would be really important. And if there is too much isolation and there is understimulation, you can have exactly the same effect in an individual than you can have when they are overstimulated. And even sundowning, which can happen not only because someone is fatigued mentally, but also because they are bored and understimulated through the course of the day and they haven't done enough. So it's really important. That's where that routine and the habits and so forth really come into play. So I think we've talked about that already. So one of the things that in terms of encouraging individuals to visit, for example, or even and being very honest about the fact, sometimes when we provide a diagnosis in our offices, people will say, what should I do now? Should I tell my children that I have this diagnosis? Should I share that with my friends, or should I not? For me, the answer always is yes, you should. And the reason why you should is because that becomes a support group, or at the very least, it is so freeing to not have to pretend that something is not the way it actually is. And then those people, there are people who are going to fall off. You're not going to see them anymore because they don't know what to do, and they don't have the skill set, the energy, or whatever it takes, to be part of your world. But by the same token, the ones you take along with you are the individuals who are really motivated to continue and to come along for that journey. So what are the ways in which you can also help those individuals stay in the life of a person with dementia? Reminiscence is a huge is a very huge asset. So whether it's a memory box, whether it's old, and now I don't know what our kids are going to do, because they're going to have to find all their old phones and scroll through the pictures. But we still have, we still have photo albums, for example, or looking through things that were, a shared interest between those people. So sitting and watching a game together, if you enjoyed watching hockey, or if you enjoyed watching a musical, or so it doesn't have to be sort of a speaking interactive activity. It can just be someone enjoying a particular activity with you. Okay, so these are just some of the ways in which you can kind of facilitate that. Communication is really important. So we said that communication breaks down. So whether it is, in different types of dementia, will it manifest themselves in different communication difficulties. So for example, with Alzheimer's, one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's is that people begin to have difficulty finding words and substituting words and calling something by the wrong name and so forth. So it's extremely difficult to communicate and to articulate your thoughts that way. When someone has Parkinson's or Lewy body disease, the problem with language is different. It may not be about finding the words, but it may be about the speed of retrieval, or it may be about staying on point and being able to articulate the thought, being able to put it together and deliver what it is that you wanted to say. So there might be different reasons why a person with dementia has difficulty with language and communication. But it is still important to communicate in every way that we can. So if I was talking to you with my with my back to you, you're already struggling a little bit, because of course you're not necessarily, and I know that working with masks for 3 years, was exhausting, and that's because you're losing the input that comes from actually lip reading. But it shouldn't be surprising to know that communication has a lot less to do with the words and more to do with the nonverbals and the para language. So the tone of voice, the delivery, the rhythm, what is happening nonverbally, what's happening to my face when I'm communicating. I could be saying all the right words and, sounding very empathetic in terms of the words that I use, but my anxiety is off the charts, and the way that I'm speaking is tense. A person with dementia will react to the emotion much more than to the words. They're not hearing the words necessarily, they are feeling the emotion. And that's what then creates anxiety and fear, and the feeling and the reaction that they will have to you as well. So it's really, really important to really hold on to that. Yes, you want to speak clearly. You want to make sure that they hear you. You want to make sure that it's concise and concrete and without too many choices and not long run-on sentences. All of those things are true. But you also want to communicate in a way that does come across as, I am here and I am speaking, and what you're going to say to me is really important, and we're working on this together, and my emotions are going to match, my words. So that's really important. And of course, having open-ended questions, if you think about someone who is having difficulty conceptualizing, then it's kind of like, when you used to pick up your children from school and say, what did you do at school today? And they're like, oh, I don't know, nothing, because the day is too big. It's too much. They can't choose. They can't prioritize out of that. It's the same thing when, when we have cognitive issues, it's the same kind of problem. So a direct, something shorter, something more concrete, a specific question is much better than an open-ended one. Don't ask for complicated decisions. And as well, so we talk about this often with nurses when we're talking about, okay, this patient has a cognitive impairment, you have to, nurses have a whale of a time because, I mean, there are procedures that have to happen and so forth. So, or they have to teach them certain things. So we always talk about the the say and do method. So I am telling you what to do, but I'm also showing you at the same time. So you are using visual input, and you're using a certain kind of memory and a certain way of processing information, as well as the language system, okay? So if you demonstrate at the same time, or if you use nonverbals, it enhances communication significantly. Chunking, breaking the information down into smaller pieces. We all have a certain registration span. Our attention span is limited, and we can register plus or minus 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. Okay, so the thing is, it can be 5 words, or it can be 5 chunks of information, plus or minus 2. So if you find a way to break things down, let someone process that, and then move on to the next part, it's good. And also, if it's possible, and I sometimes will actually tell my patients this, I'll say, the way that you can break communication down and not take too much in at one point, you basically can say, oh, stop, just let me interrupt you there. I just want to make sure that I've got the first part of what you said right. So then you say, let me check my understanding. Did you tell me, is this what you said? And then you've broken down how quickly you've stopped the message, and you've had a chance to repeat it and rehearse it before moving on to the next thing. So I'll sort of teach it as a strategy for the person who's trying to control the amount of information, but it goes a long way the other way as well. So you might say, tomorrow we're going to do a number of different things. So the first thing is such and such at this hour. Okay, so, and again, just repeat it, but just in a different way, right? So what's the first thing we're going to do? Oh, this, that's right. Then after that, and then go on. So you're breaking the information down into pieces. Okay. Yes, we've talked about that. If I'm speaking in this room, I think I have your undivided attention. But if a lot was happening around us, and if there was a party going on just outside that door, your brain has to filter what's happening out there, filter that distraction out, and say what's relevant is what's happening here, not what's happening there. But our mind wanders, and we are drawn to things that are happening elsewhere. So if you want someone's undivided attention, remove distractions from the environment. Turn off the TV, make sure the door is closed, make sure that you're right in front of the person when you're speaking. So avoiding distractions helps them register the information better. That goes for everyone, actually. And I've talked about relying on nonverbal communication. Oh, this just is too sensitive for me. I'm so sorry. I have to go back. I think we're still at this. Relying more on nonverbal communication. I talked about body language. And the other thing too is the position, okay? So if I'm speaking to someone, I say, we really need to leave, we have to go to the doctors now, or it's time to take a bath because, it's been a week, and so the spa is waiting. If I'm right over someone and I'm above them, it is much more threatening. They feel, it can feel quite oppressive. So it's important to be further away, to be at eye level. Or sometimes if you're having conversations, so within the hospital, we talk about something called the defensive stance. So what is an open sort of stance that promotes communication between people is that you're standing at about a 45-degree angle from them, okay? And a couple of feet away from them. This creates a psychological sense of space. So you are not perceived as threatening, particularly when patients and, hospital staff interact. We try to remember that very much. So that this way, first of all, you can take a step back if somebody's coming towards you, and, there have been those cases. And by the same token, the individual doesn't feel like you're hovering right over them. So it's the same thing. Keep an eye out for the kinds of things that might seem like it's a loss of control, they're being overpowered, or it's kind of creating a sense of fear. Okay. Personal space. Point to objects, visual cues. I think we've talked about this before as well. And it is also important to know that you can sit in silence with someone and still communicate a lot. So you don't have to be using words all the time, or that you can show something or, accomplish something simply by leading someone, very with gentle redirection without necessarily speaking and having them have to process the information as well. And of course, if you are the person listening, so have any of you been challenged by, having someone who may be searching for words? It's very hard to resist not finishing this sentence for that person, right? Because you feel like you want them out of their pain, right? But it is important sometimes to come to someone's rescue. But by the same token, having the patience, allowing them to express themselves, finding a way, it's also a way for that person to not feel sort of humiliated, rushed, and less able to do what they have to do. And again, watch their body language as well, because there's a lot of information that's coming from that. And if, again, checking your understanding, so not just having the other person check their understanding, but also for you. And you might say, I'm not sure that I understood exactly, but I want to understand. I'm here and I want to help you. So I really want to know, is this what you're trying to say? Or is this what's bothering you? Because then at least an individual, without jumping to the assumption that you have understood, then you are in a dialogue. The value of silence. All right, so I think we've talked about boredom already. So I think the only thing that is important here is the following. It's important for people to be meaningfully engaged. Okay, so behavioral activation. So when an individual is depressed, the first line of intervention for depression behaviorally is behavioral activation. Not the medication, but behavioral activation, which means what is something that they value or enjoy doing? Can they put that back in their lives? Simply by doing that one thing, there is already a boon to how they feel emotionally. Okay, so meaningful activity is extremely important for everyone, but it certainly is important when people are, there's more isolation, there's less that an individual can do. But what's important is the process. It doesn't matter if the painting actually looks like a flower, or if the towel is folded just the right way, or if the dishes are dried properly. What's important is that the person feels that they're part of the task. So it's the process. It's not the final outcome that you're, whether it's, the same basket of hand cloths or dishcloths that is folded on a regular basis. I mean, I remember at a nursing home that I went to, they just had a basket of laundry, several baskets out, and some people just gravitated towards those and they folded the same laundry every day. But they were doing something for their living environment, right? Or a personal anecdote, my father-in-law who had Alzheimer's and lived with us for a time, he was always, whenever the house had to be cleaned, it was him with the broom. So basically, when he lived with us, even my children would remember to just give, Papa the broom. So, I mean, he'd have the broom and he'd be sweeping around, and basically he was doing something, whether the room needed to be swept or not. So I think what's important is that in the moment it's enjoyed. It might be a shared activity, or it's something that makes them feel useful. And it is a way to avoid boredom. It doesn't have to be a social activity or something that is an intellectual interest. Obviously, as cognitive impairment progresses, it is much more difficult to learn new information. So while it's a great thing, learning is, intellectual engagement is another pillar of brain health. So in our lives, what we want to do is to continue learning throughout life, because that is actually a way to stimulate our brain and to keep it healthy, and even to help some of those nerve fibers branch out and get a little fluffier. But when we are in a process of cognitive decline, that learning ability really changes. So we don't want to be doing something that requires them to learn something in order to do it. We don't want to do that. We want to rely on the familiar, on the well-established tasks. So, there are plenty of examples, even within the hospital. We have this beat up by the geriatric acute unit. There's this old beat up piano, and every so often you'll hear someone, going off to play, and it may be someone who barely speaks and can't remember, that the nurse was there 3 hours ago, but they sit at the piano and they play beautifully, right? So it's old, acquired, overlearned skills and habits that go last. So what are those things, and how can we incorporate those into the life of our loved one? A safe and adequate working area, good lighting, and obviously, you might try something today and it just works like a charm. And you think, oh, okay, so tomorrow we'll try the same thing. Tomorrow there's no interest. That's okay. It worked today. Maybe it'll work again tomorrow. Maybe not. But, and if not, then maybe another day. So this is another anecdote about Ronald Reagan. So this is actually something that happened. So we know, of course, that he had Alzheimer's later in his life. And one of the things that his Secret Service agents would do, he loved to clean his pool. It was something that he used to do in, his home in California. So they would actually put leaves in the pool every night. And every day, Ronald Reagan would have the task of cleaning his pool. And so this is just an example, of a simple activity, something that someone finds enjoyable, calming, and it can be done on a regular basis. So there are some resources, I think, in your handouts for some different activities. Of course, the Dementia Society is a great resource for that as well. They have activity boxes. They have different kinds of things that you can also tap into. So this is a great place for resources. So I talked about the integrated experience, the fact that, our interactions, basically it's the two people on the teeter-totter, and that's what makes it balance. So, I've said so many things in the last however long it is that I've been talking, and think about the work that a caregiver, think about all the tasks that I've just laid out for a caregiver. It's a huge responsibility. Be on the lookout, plan ahead, structure, facilitate, remember how you feel about things, watch your responses. Well, who's looking after you? So who's caregiving? Who's looking after the caregiver? Caregiver burnout is a huge contributor to the quality of life of the individual, the person with dementia. Because if the caregiver is not looking after the caregiver and finding ways to replenish, to restore, to revitalize, to rest, the interactions and the quality of care is, at some point, something has to give. So it's either the caregiver's health or the kind of care that's provided, the environment, and so forth. So it's really, really important to make sure that you remember that there's a balance between the person that is being cared for and the person doing the caring. And also to remember that all of the things that we talk about tonight, they're all ideals. They're things that we should keep in mind. There are our toolbox, and we are going to make mistakes. And sometimes some things work and sometimes they don't. But just as we strive to be compassionate for the person with dementia, remember that it's also important to be compassionate as a caregiver as well, because there are going to be times where things just don't hit the mark, right? And so that's important. So that's important for me to say. Okay, so taking care of yourselves. I think we've talked about that. And of course, there's information about respite care and time for a break. Am I on time? Semi?
7:02.
I always digress. I kind of go off on my own. A little break? A minute to just stretch? How about a question? Does anybody have a question? We can break the speaker versus, yes. Okay. Oh,
So maybe you
yes.
can use this mic.
Use this guy. In a situation where you find that the person you're dealing with is very apathetic,
Mhm.
right? And you're doing all the, oh, you used to like to watch cartoons, or you used to like to do the puzzle in the paper, and they're like just totally
Mhm.
out of it.
Mhm.
Then what do you do? Like, how do you, and now let's say I'm getting frustrated. Oh my God, I tried everything. I tried to make a cup of tea. I did this, I did that, I did everything on the planet, and I'm done. I get to that point where I say, I'm done. I'm out of here. So what suggestions do you have in that situation?
In fact, I was just telling Herman today about these little caregiver videos from UCLA. I just sent him the link today, and one of them is on apathy. And what you basically just described in words is exactly what the vignette, it just shows like, okay, I give up, because it's like, no, you go. No, I don't feel like going.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
feel like getting out of bed. So let me try to think about that, because I just watched that today. But in addition to that, it's sort of like, what are the kinds of things? Because apathy can happen as well, for example, after traumatic brain injury. So there are lots of different brain conditions that can create apathy. So one of the things to remember is that a person with apathy will have trouble initiating. Okay, so one thing that you have to take on is being the initiator. So the first thing is you have to kind of take the first step. So that's one thing. Creating a habit, creating a routine, that's also important. Not worrying about feeling every moment is also important. So realizing when you can let it go and when you can't. Thinking about activities that are enjoyable and finding ways to motivate a person empathetically, so for example, you can spar with someone and say, you've got to get up, like you've been in bed all day long, it's time to get up. No, I'm fine where I am. It's like, look, so it might be about, for example, saying, I really want to spend some time, and I was hoping that we would, be able to do this thing together. I always enjoy, looking at such and such or baking with you. And I wish you would. So I've put everything already, everything's out. Why don't you come with me for 15 minutes? And then after that, a lot of times what people will also say is, if you pair something that they're not really interested or reluctant to do with then a semi-reward, well, after you're up and we do that, how about a little bit of that ice cream that you really enjoy? Or, I mean, it's that kind of thing. So it is extremely, and I mean, I'm saying all these things and you can try them all, and sometimes it can work and sometimes it just doesn't. But you might also negotiate, like an alarm. So, you want to sleep. I'm going to set the alarm for 15 minutes. I'm going to come back in 15 minutes. And then we're going to, then it would be, so using alarms. So we usually at rehab, they'll do that. They'll use alarms, they'll use a routine, they'll use a clock and say when, when at 6:30, when this hand goes down to the bottom, then that's when, okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll, now of course, memory, will have an effect on that. So these are just some some little strategies that you can use, but it is extremely difficult, and a lot of times, and it's often it's about going to appointments or, you know,
Mhm.
time sensitive things. So apathy is a huge huge problem to deal with. So I would say those are the types of things ahead of time, you know, even preparation for something, saying, you know, this morning, this has to happen. So we're going to, you know, get ready. But again, not coming from, and remember that the escalation happens because of your own stress and anxiety. So finding a way to redirect them very gently and empathetically, you know, and trying to use, I love doing that with you. I really hope that we get a
Mhm.
chance to do that. Or, you know, this is what I know you enjoy that, and let's do it together. And, you know, let's, so I think just trying to draw them out that way. If that is reaching an impasse, then, you know, you kind of have to take a few minutes,
Mhm.
head off somewhere, and then reset a little bit and figure out the next thing. But anyway, and so maybe if once Herman goes through the links as well, you might see that that little video as well. It's the same kind of clip, and basically it's like I throw my hands up in the air, I give up, I can't
Mhm.
get you out of bed. But it's kind of like enticement, direction,
Mhm.
structure, empathy, you know, cajoling,
Mhm.
bribing. It's all of these,
Mhm.
all of the above.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Anyone else
It's
got a
hard.
question?
Did you have a question? No? No. Okay. Should we move on to the next part? Okay. All right. All right. So, we talked about the problem-solving approach, and we also talked about the fact that we have to kind of determine when something is important to address and when it's not. So this is the question you ask yourself. Well, is the behavior dangerous, either to the person or to someone else? If it's not, can I accept it? Can we just let it go this time around? Or do I have to, is it causing suffering, or is it creating a, you know, insecurity somewhere? You know, how do I have to deal with it? Is it something that the person, is this about something that the person needs that I have to decipher? Then if so, then these are the times where you deal with it. If it's dangerous, if it's causing suffering, or if it's because there's something that you are required to do in this situation. And so you're making decisions when you're using this approach. And so the ABC approach is kind of that problem-solving, solution-based kind of focus that I was talking about before. A, what does A stand for? What came before? So if you think about something that, let's say a crisis happens and you think, okay, this can't happen again. I have to figure this one out. I'm going to have to work out what happened here. Why did it happen? How can I avoid it next time? The first place you start is at the beginning. What happened before they lost their patients, or what happened before, you know, the yelling began, or, you know, throwing something on the floor? What was it that triggered the behavior? So in your handouts, you'll see the pieces model. And we'll look at that in a minute. So A stands for antecedent. B is what is the behavior that actually happened? How did the person react? And who is it a problem for? Is it a problem for me? Or is it a problem for the person with dementia? And what was the consequence? What happened after that? We missed our appointment. Or now there's just a lot of bad feeling, and now this is going to happen all day. This is going to sort of linger all day. It creates a lot of stress in the home. There's going to be lack of cooperation for the rest of the day. Those are the consequences to me. Or I feel so badly. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? So the consequence is you're not happy with yourself about what happened. So the ABC approach. Obviously, if you're trying to be proactive, and you accept that there are times where something will happen that didn't quite go the way that you wanted it to go. Journaling is a really great way of keeping track and being able to sort of decipher what the A and the B and the C of a particular situation, what they were. So I said the pieces model, so hopefully you have that in your, and again, the handouts are great references because they will not be a test at the end of the session. There's too many things to remember. But pieces, so what does that mean? Was it something physical that happened? Is it because, again, so for example, someone with Lewy body disease, part of the problem with Lewy body is that, and Parkinson's as well, is that the parts of the brain that are decoding visual information begin to decline. So because of that, they will misperceive. So a shadow will become a person, or they will become or leaves moving against the window will become someone trying to come in, or sounds that are heard suddenly become people laughing or someone breaking into the house and so forth. It's the brain that is misfiring and creating a hallucination. Okay, for example. So in terms of physical, you might want to say, well, this room was really cluttered, or it's not well lit, or I have to get rid of that mirror because that mirror is in front of them. And when the shadows come, they're reflecting movement from these rooms, and suddenly they think someone's in the room and so forth. So it might be something, or something physical inside them as well. Is it about the fact that they're being asked to remember things that they're not able to remember anymore, or use language when they're struggling with that, or that conceptually something is very difficult and their conceptual skills have really declined? So is it a matter of the cognitive limitations that they face? Is it something to do with their emotion? Or is it basically asking someone to do more than they are able to do? The task is too difficult, or it is too simple and it's very boring. And again, the environment I talked about as well. And then the social self, and I think we've talked about that already. So what are things that are meaningful to the individual, or are these things that they've never liked or that really go against their values? And so all of these are all things that can just be triggers to the psychological or behavioral symptoms of dementia. So these are the kinds of things that you're thinking about pieces. Is it this? Which one is it that could have been the preceding event? So we have some examples. Which one is this one? Oh, yes. Okay. So there are 2 or 3 examples here in the, and you might have one. If you have one, feel free to share it. But so let's see. This one here is about, if I remember behind me. So basically, a woman notices that her husband becomes agitated at the same time, at the same time of day. And what she realizes that that's around the time that the mailman comes. So then she thinks, okay, well, maybe if I bring him outside for some fresh air, and just he can relax a little bit, then he won't get agitated at that time of day. Well, so she realizes that even though she did take him outside, he actually becomes even more agitated with the mailman arriving. And she realized that after doing that a couple of days, it was like, oh, it isn't the time of day that's the issue, it's what happens at that time. So what happens is that the mailman is coming and he's misperceiving this person, a stranger coming into the home, and he knows it's something that's kind of breaking the cocoon or the security of the home. So once she has realized that it's not the first thing she thought was the problem, but it's actually something else, and by journaling, she was able to do that. The approach then was, okay, well then instead of being outside and meeting the mailman when he's coming, will actually go somewhere else where he's not even going to be aware that the mailman has come. And so that agitation stopped. So this is where that kind of journaling can kind of come into play. I'm not going to go into, too many of these, but it's the same kind of approach each time. So we might think that that the issue is a particular issue. We notice that it's sort of a repetitive, or it happens when we want to, or it may be, for example, going to appointments, or every time they have to get in the car, or when they have to put their coat on, so it's kind of like, okay, I have to break this down. What is it? Is it, is the coat too hot? Is it that, the drive is long? Is it that it's that time of day? So if I know that someone is agitated in the morning and doesn't want to leave the house because they're not early risers, well, is it maybe better to accept appointments later on in the afternoon when they've had a chance to be out already? So you're kind of trying to work out these ABCs as best you can. So, okay, this is another example, and that's okay. So a boredom again. I think we've talked about all of this already. So paranoia. I don't know if you've had experience with this, but when you have, particularly when you have a situation, it's kind of like a few things have to happen cognitively for paranoia to happen. One is that memory begins to fail you. Okay, so there are things that we may not recall having done, or we've put something somewhere to keep it safe, and then we, don't necessarily remember that that's where we put it. So suddenly the item is missing. And then what's also happening is that conceptually our insight is changing. So what's happening is that feedback loop that tells us it's not really realistic to imagine that my daughter, would take my, my prized brooch, or, my pearls, because I just don't think that that's what this, my child would do. But that loop suddenly, that feedback, that part of the brain, the frontal lobes of the brain that sort of tell us, this doesn't really jibe with past experience. It's not really something that is reasonable to expect. That is also gone. So suddenly we have that failure in the feedback loop, and that, sort of assessing what's realistic and what's not. And we have the memory impairment. And we don't recall the episode. So it's the episodic part of it as well, which is, I actually took this and I put it here for safekeeping. So when you have that situation, then the circumstances for paranoia are rife. So you have to realize that when you're dealing with paranoia, you are dealing with brain dysfunction. It's not just, someone, repeatedly saying that you haven't given them the medications because you want them to die, or, that they basically, I mean, we've encountered all kinds, but, so it's very important to remember that. So the most important thing when you encounter paranoia is to use de-escalating strategies. You do not want to or if it's a delusion, you are not contesting the delusion. That will not work, because for the individual, it's not a delusion, it's reality. Okay, so the important thing, first of all, is to acknowledge that they are distressed, because I think all of us in a moment of fear or uncertainty would want to hear, oh, I can hear that you're upset. I want to help. Let's figure this out together. So that's like, oh, they believe me, but they acknowledge that I'm feeling a certain way. Okay, so that acknowledgement, that empathy is a very, very important first step. I can see that you're upset. I don't like seeing you this way. I want to help you. Let's see what we can sort out together. where, you know, what happened, what's the issue, okay? So you know that that's not necessarily based in reality. So you're not going to enter the delusion necessarily with the person. But what you want to do, show that you want to help, listen to what they're saying, look at, well, first of all, if you're problem solving for the next time, there are all kinds of ways in which you think, okay, this next time, you know, this happened because of such and such. We're going to have to figure out a way to address this issue. But in that moment, what you're doing is you're reassuring the person, you're listening empathetically. You are maybe saying, I'm not pretty sure that I saw the purse here. I think it was in, you know, in this corner. We can look for it in a minute. But before that, do we just have a cup of tea? So what you're doing is you're, you know, no, maybe for the person, it's like, no, how can you think of tea at a moment like this? You know, what we need to do is find my $1,000. So, you know, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to redirect. So you're trying to distract. And that's ultimately the way that you cope with the situation. So you reassure, because if you lock horns, it's just going to escalate. It is going to become a problem. Now, for the next time, so hopefully that works, the redirection will work. But for the next time, you have to think, okay, well, what is creating the situation? What's happening is that they are afraid that they're going to forget or lose their wallet. And so they're putting it in a safe place. But then they're forgetting what that safe place is, right? So then you're trying to figure it out, okay, well, then how can we avoid this issue? Can we think of a safe place that we can all remember is a safe place? And I know that individuals have gone so far as to buy like a second purse of exactly the same, you know, so it's like, no, your purse is right here. You know, you lost your purse, here's your purse or a wallet. You know, so so it's kind of problem solving to think about how is it that you can work it out and avoid some of the issues. So, and it might be paranoia about people coming into the house, and you want to make sure that so it's like, okay, and I am, you know, what can we do to make you feel more safe and secure? Shall we put a security camera? I mean, I've had families put security cameras up, you know, just by windows and so forth, or lights, and you know, that security lights that come on, making sure that everything is locked, or covering, you know, exits so that they don't sort of trigger oh, there's the door, you know, someone's going to come through that door. So you have to kind of, it takes time to work it out. And that's also why working, and as a plug for the Dementia Society, but also working with a dementia care coach is important, because a dementia care coach will have some experience in some of these scenarios, because you know, the fact that they are cliches that we all think about, a cliche simply means that it happens a lot. So it's a cliche for a reason, and that is because it's very frequent occurrence. So if you speak to someone who has experience with those sort of behaviors and has, you know, experience with, you know, different solutions, alternatives that have worked for different people, sometimes they can be helpful in helping you find your way. But redirection and shifting the focus to a different activity. Avoid reasoning or, you know, that's not rational. I don't think that that's what happened. You certainly don't want to seem like you're becoming aggressive, or that you are, you know, that you are escalating, that you are kind of getting to a point where it's beginning to affect you. The next thing is that sometimes the paranoia is about you, about the caregiver, right? And suddenly, it is so hurtful. You know, and we have situations where we'll have, you know, patients in the hospital, and it's like, I don't want my daughter to be allowed to visit, you know, she's doing this, she's doing that. And meanwhile, you know, one always has to check these things because you never know. But by the same token, what we realize is that a lot of times those are delusions or it's paranoia. And, you know, the family members are not at all doing what the patient experiences. What's really, really important and is the idea here is that you have to be aware that this is not, it's not about you. It's a very hard thing to reframe emotionally, okay? And it is something that you have to practice, but it is very much about not becoming the sponge. You're not absorbing that. You're not taking that. What you're doing is you're reflecting the emotion. So you're the mirror. I can see that you're really upset right now. You don't know where your wallet is. I want to find it with you. Let's see if we can find it. Versus, no, you're stealing all my stuff. No, I'm not. I'm not doing that. How can you do that to me? Oh my gosh, I've never done anything but help you. And all of a sudden it becomes so painful. So it's really important to work with yourself, to really, really practice to not take that personally. It is a loss, it's a loss because that individual may have been, your parent or, someone or a spouse, someone that you have cared for and loved and, cared for deeply. And suddenly you think, oh my gosh, this is the way he sees me, or this is the way she sees me now. And it's a loss. And this is something we have to process. But what we want to do is we want to keep the channel of communication going with the individual that we're caring for. And what's important to realize is that this is a loss. We do have to process that, but we still have to get on with it. And ultimately hang on to the fact that in the past, it was a different story. And what's happening now is that it is an illness. Okay? It's an illness. So, and that requires an awful lot of ego strength. It's not something that's easy to do as a loved one. Sometimes you have to remove yourself and decide, because if you've become the trigger, and I have seen families deal with it that way, thinks Bobby is stealing all the money and Bobby is the faithful, POA that's going to the bank and doing all of the bills on a regular basis. Okay, this isn't going to work anymore. It's going to have to be someone else that now manages the finances, because, this is too much of a trigger. So it is a way to work it out. And again, that's where it's about staying up here, and then healing your heart in the ways that you can, in other ways. So I say it, but it's so hard to do, right? Yeah.
In terms of what you've just said, how do we find resources for ourselves? Like, mirror. And when I listen to you speak, it's so eloquent. How can you think of those words? And I tell you, when it's me, I can't say anything. I start.
And then you just
up.
break down in tears,
Yeah,
and it's like, how can I?
No, I want to help. But, all I can do is just shut
Yeah.
down is what happens.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's where self-care is extremely important. And that's where surrounding yourself with your support system is extremely important. So whether it's groups like this or whether it's shared experiences, because really when we are caring for someone with dementia, it is not just the experience of a child or, a spouse, or it is the experience of dealing with someone with dementia. So you want to be in a place where you don't have to say a lot for people to understand what you're going through, because they're going through the same thing. And I think learning from each other is important, but also just leaning on each other. And really, in the end, it's only about empathy. The feeling is, yeah, it's really hard. And that's why it's really important for me always to acknowledge that there are feelings here. This is not just about, the rational problem solving is something that we're doing, but we are human beings, right? So we're people as well. And it takes a toll. So how do you deal with stress? That's how you will deal with this, because it's a situational stressor in your own life. And not only that, you are slowly and continually grieving the loss of that person, because your interaction with that person is different than it used to be. So how do you manage your grief? How do you process it? How do you manage your stress? What are the kinds of things that help you? What are the kinds of things that, nourish you? It would be any other situational stress. It would be exactly the same. It's easy to say, well, take a warm bath or take a walk, but speak to someone and share your feelings, but you know what I mean? We all have coping mechanisms, and we really have to really dig deep and figure out what those are, because this is one huge situational stressor in our lives. But it is just important. Reframing is half the work. And it is very much cognitive behavior therapy is very much about understanding that behind every reaction that we have, there is a thought. So there's a feeling, behind the feeling, there's a thought. So the feeling is, I'm really hurt. How can you say this about me? The thought behind that, what is it? How can you see me this way? I've been, so it's a thought. So now the thought then, that has to break. And what you're saying is, okay, there's an illness that's affecting the way that you see the world. And right now, the target is me. It's about the illness. This is not about me. So this is what you're doing all the time. It's psychological, like you're doing psychotherapy with yourself. And even if it is therapy, even sometimes it might be therapeutic to be part of a group, to speak with a friend, to talk to someone, that even a care coach or someone who is someone who can offer you support. But it is important to realize that you are going through something very difficult when we encounter these situations. So it's not just a matter of stepping into I'll journal that and I'll figure it all out. It's also the other part of this is I'm a human being and this is really tough. And that was my parent. And I, had like 50 years or 60 years. And this isn't what I expected, to happen now. So we have to that's all work that we have to do. Yeah. So it's not easy. All right. Let's see how we're doing. Now it's not moving. Herman, is it moving? Oh, don't argue or try to commit. Okay, I think we've talked about delusions. I can see you're upset. Let me help you. You don't have to agree. You can listen, let them know you feel badly and so forth. And then how can you redirect? What are the ways in which you can shift the attention? And then, yes. So, yes, I think I've talked about this already before, and it's also in there. So these are different cases that are part of different scenarios, and they are kind of worked out in your handout. I don't know how we're doing for time, but I'm certainly happy to take.
7:30.
We still have time. I'd be happy to consider cases that you have on your plates rather than the cases that are here. Are there any questions or any scenarios that you faced where, and thank you for sharing yours, but is there anything that anyone listening out there in the virtual world? Otherwise, nothing coming up.
So would be watching a favorite TV program. So for my mom, it's curling.
Oh, okay.
Loves curling,
Okay.
and it can be curling from, a year ago. It's
Right.
still
Yes.
a new tournament today, right? Oh, there's a curling on. So I guess my question would be, how much can I expose her to something she really likes? Is there a jeopardy in that she gets bored with it after a while, and then that's the only thing she's ever used to like? And then exactly, and then upsets when it ends, because now she wants to watch curling 24/7, 7 days a week,
Like, oh my God.
365 days a year. So,
Oh my Lord.
and because we're now into the curling.
It's riveting.
It's riveting.
It can be quite riveting, but 24/7 is
Facilitate it.
right.
But is there a jeopardy in doing that? If the one thing she loves all of a sudden goes out the window?
Oh, I see. If you get to the point where that becomes, well,
Or you just-
I'm not sure. Can you see that happening?
No, I was.
Maybe for your sake.
I was thinking of, I probably could get some DVDs or contact some of the media about taping some of these tournaments that they've had on TV
Yeah.
and just playing them over.
Yeah.
Even in June or
Yeah.
before the season begins, and
Yeah,
say, hey,
I think
curling's
so.
on, here you go.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
nothing motivates you more than
Yeah.
curling.
Well, I would say one thing that comes to mind is that you can set a time for curling. So, it's not an open-ended, I mean, is that about that routine and structure I was talking about? So you might say, ooh, it's almost 4 o'clock, or, and what is that time of day? That's also strategic. So is it that, is there more agitation or more boredom at a certain time of day? You think, I have curling up my sleeve. I can actually, get through this bewitching time by putting a game of curling on at this hour. So you can kind of think about it in a way it can be an asset to you. And so.
And you control the situation.
Yes, and you can say, oh, now it's, it's kind of like with my grandson. Oh, sorry, the remote is broken. Oh, the remote is broken. When are you getting new batteries? Every time I come, the remote is broken because the TV is never on, right? So it's the same thing. Snow. So this is the same thing, I think, with, with someone that we're caring for. It's like, oh, the game, that's why I think it's important if you have something that's even taped, it's an hour long, or it's 2 hours long, or whatever, and you say, oh, from 4 to 6, that can be a good time, or 6 till 8, or something like that, or 10 till 12, or, it's a certain time of day, and it becomes part of the routine. Or these days of the week, it's on the calendar, oh, these are, so if you structure it, then you can limit it, and it becomes something that you look forward to, rather than it just being, because then, yes, like everything else, if it's just all the time and that's all there is, that isn't going to work for you. You're right. There's a jeopardy that you face there. It might be okay, but it becomes, there's no pleasure attached to that anymore. There's not that expectation, that sense of, something exciting happening. So I think maybe thinking about it that way might be a solution. Did you have anything at all?
I'm just thinking of a situation that we went through 2 years ago. After my mother, my father was living here, home, retirement home. And he hadn't quite digested the fact that my mother was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And he, well, one time a telephone operator called and said, hey, I don't know how she found me, but anyway, he was on the phone trying to reach her in their old town where they used to live. Or he would, get it to try and get a taxi to the bus station.
Exactly.
To go and meet her. How
Yeah.
do you deal with this sort of situation?
Yep. So, so the first thing is that when that happens, what we have to remember is that the person is reliving an old memory, right? So even in wandering, sometimes that's very much a case. It's, had a friend of mine whose father at 3 in the morning, and I mean, they had put the lock way at the top of the door. He figured out where the lock was and was out going home. It was the middle of the night and on a snowy evening because he was going back home. So in that moment, he's reliving a different memory, right? And so with the case of a loved one who's passed away, they may not have absorbed, absolutely. It just doesn't register that that person is gone. So the first thing I think is to acknowledge the feeling in this moment. It's like, wow, mom was really special, right? You had all this time that you had together, and I can see that she's not here right now, and I can see that you're missing her, right? I think at that moment, it's like, well, should I remind them that she's passed away? So you might say she's not here. I don't know that it's necessary to confront someone with a harsh reality that they're going to forget in the next few minutes. And I think there's actually an anecdote like that in one of these examples is about someone whose spouse has passed away. But I think what's important is to meet them at the emotion and to sort of say, shall we look at some pictures? Because maybe at that moment he's missing, he's missing his wife. So it's a question of sitting with that emotion and that feeling and acknowledging that it's there, talking about her, looking at some pictures, and then redirecting to something different. So not sitting in that memory for too long, but acknowledging it for a moment. She's not here. She's not here right now. I miss her too. She's not here right now. I wish she was. She was a beautiful woman. Look at, the photo. I'm so glad to look at this, Oh, you know, it's maybe it's time to do something else. So as soon as you have that moment to be able to redirect it, you do it that way. And the thing is that it may be that you need to do that many times over again. And then I think one of the other things too is triggers. So even looking at the environment. So sometimes you'll notice in nursing homes, you know, lots of pictures, right? Sometimes it's helpful, and I wonder if sometimes it's not, because then suddenly they're seeing their wedding picture, and it's a trigger of, oh, that's my wife, where is she? You know, so it may be that you need to remove, not necessarily not talk about the person, or, you know, pretend that, you know, they never lived, but being able to talk about them in finite ways, or when you're reminiscing with photos and so forth, but not necessarily having that trigger right there. And then in a way, you kind of, what you do is you sort of write a script in your head. You kind of have that same response. That response is the same response you have each time that episode happens. Now, if they are trying to leave, you know, the nursing home because they want to go home, then that's a different story. And there are many different ways that nursing homes work with families, from, you know, because obviously safety is really important. But, and then that becomes more about wandering, right? It's more about exit seeking and so forth. So whether it's alarms at the bed, alarms at the door, you know, making sure that doorways are masked in a way so that it doesn't look like a door, you know, there's like a curtain in front of it or something like that. There are different ways of people, different things that people resort to kind of keep, you know, to keep that from happening. Sometimes having, one of the examples in one of these, in the vignettes that I was talking about today, is that you actually have the doormat on this side so that it almost becomes a barrier to, you know, the door and so forth. And then a lot of understanding on the part of staff as well, you know, but everybody has the same response. So when that happens, it's the same thing. You know, you were married this long. It was, you know, isn't it wonderful that you had this long and happy marriage? You miss her a lot. She's not here right now, you know, well, when is she coming? Well, right now, there are things that we need to do. How about we, you know, So you're not lying to a person, but you are acknowledging the feeling and then moving them on in a different direction, and then managing the behaviors. And then back to the drawing board when those things don't happen. Let's see what else is on in these cases. Oh. So let's talk about anxiety for a moment, if we still have a bit of time, because so anxiety can come from boredom. It can come from overstimulation. It can come from a feeling of powerlessness, from a sense of loss of control, right? So, and also, like I said, the unexpected. A lot of people with dementia will lose their sense of time. So suddenly an hour becomes forever. And so all of these are things, and again, this is where the problem solving comes in. When does the anxiety happen? You know, is it before an appointment? Is it when I'm rushing them to go somewhere? Is it when I want to, you know, when I want to leave? Is it when I say I'm going to come over, and then it's 15 phone calls between now and when I, you know, when I get there? So all of these, so is it about time judgment? Is it about being unprepared? Is it about predictability? So there's so many different ways to manage anxiety, because the trigger is the important thing, right? So structure, routine, advance notice, but not advance notice 2 days before, because then that's forgotten. Advance, you know, on a calendar, tomorrow we have these things to do. We're going to lay some things out to be ready. This morning, in an hour, and make sure you have ample time. You know, you're not having appointments at, 7:30 in the morning where you have to rush out of the house. The predictability, habit and routine, having a talk with yourself first so that your anxiety is way down, giving yourself lots of time. Different signals within the environment. If it is about time, for example, using clocks, using calendars, having some visual cues. You can expect me here when the clock says 6:30. So it has to be here and here. You might say, I'm on my way, I'm an hour away, so you might give them that kind of notice. So anxiety has to be managed based on what it is anxiety producing. Okay, so you see that there can be many different scenarios. And of course, how do you manage? So these are all ways to prevent anxiety from happening, sort of that routine, the calendars, the clocks, and so forth. But again, also, what happens if someone is in an anxious state? They're pacing, they're agitated, they're shifting around, they're, not paying attention. So this is where we kind of go back to that knowledge that we have of the person. What did this person rely on to relieve their stress? Or what are the kinds of things that we know are stress relievers in general? Well, we know that things that are soothing and not more anxiety provoking may be physical exercise. They may be something artistic, so music, for example, can be very soothing and calming. And it could be, if we know that a certain time of day is associated with a person becoming quite anxious, when it gets to the evening, things slow down. It's dark outside. It's a little bit more foreboding. Maybe that's a time to make sure the lights are on in the house, that there's some gentle music playing. Is it, a fireplace on or something like that? Just things to create a sense of calm ahead of time. So these are the kinds of ways that you can respond to that. So routine, I've talked about, physical exercise, gardening, engaging someone. So because it can also come, as I mentioned before, it can also come from boredom. So being understimulated can also be anxiety provoking. And so this is where you kind of revisit the day and you think, okay, there's just not been enough to do today. So now what can I do to engage the person in something that's meaningful or pleasurable for them? Oh, here's the example. So let's see how we did when we just kind of went off the top of our heads. When I visit, he'll say that she's just down the hall out shopping, or, should I agree or remind him? So I know you want to see her. I know you want her to be here. I know you're missing her. So basically, what's the emotion behind that? Is the person lonely? Do they need comfort and security? There's very little value in correcting. So, okay. So, and this is about apathy. We talked about that. So, still sitting and doing nothing, what will I do? Be the motivator and the initiator. So basically, remember that initiation is actually a cognitive function. So the startup of activity. So apathy can sometimes come from simply not being able to take the first step. That's what procrastination is, right? So if I'm the person who's moving through and so forth, activities tailored to the person's preference, help them get started, a small amount of activity, and then, like I said, those visual cues and reminders and so forth through the day. It is important to know that it's always important to remember, we've talked a lot about what are the kinds of things that we can do to manage difficult behaviors. But it's important to remember that these behaviors can also arise from medical conditions. So if there's a real acute change in someone and their behavior is uncharacteristic, you do have to make sure that you eliminate possible medical or physical, like not just physical discomfort, but actual acute illness. So a person with dementia will be a lot more prone to delirium or confusion if they have any type of infection, or pain and any other systemic kind of illness. That's it. Do we right on time or close?
Right on time, yes. Yeah, just to
That's
remind you
amazing.
that
Usually I either don't finish or.
if anyone has any question, we can also pass a mic so people can listen online as well. Let me see if we have any question from the crowd.
It's a lot of information. That's why you have the handouts. You can refer to them. I think it is important to know that if you have a chance to be part of a support group, that support groups are really important in a group. A group dynamic is different from anything else because you don't have to say anything to learn a lot in a group. But at the same time, you realize that you're not alone, that the things that you're going through are common, that the feelings that you're feeling are not taboo. They're just, you are a normal person living in an abnormal situation, confronted with not only management issues, but also a lot of grief. And there is grief, and just to acknowledge that it's painful. So being part of a group, having the help of an expert like a dementia care coach, availing yourself of as much support as you can to figure things out, because ultimately, why are you here? Why are you here tonight? It's because you know someone or you're caring for someone with dementia and you're motivated to be the best you can be for them, right? So ultimately, what is going to help you to do that and to look after yourself so you can do that well, not to the detriment of your own health and mental well-being. So I think it's important to be kind to yourself, to be compassionate, to take the time, repeating the information over and over again, because it does not sink in at first glance. I've been doing my job for, I'm not going to date myself, shall I say decades, and I won't say how many, it's quite a few. But every situation that we encounter, every family, every situation has just its own nuances, and it's all a little bit different. So you can have sort of the set sort of guidelines where you think, oh, this kind of work, that might have worked. But ultimately, the things that work the best are the things that you come up with for your own particular context, for the person that you're caring for, and for what works for you as well. So no amount of, self-help reading is going to do it. You have to sort of sit and think for yourselves. And that's what it requires. So it's a big job that you're doing in addition to the job of living your lives. And so it's just important to know that, just to acknowledge that.